One of the great Nididhyasana texts that one comes across just before enlightenment or beyond the pale of enlightenment is the Mandukya Upanishad Kataka. Now, this is not simply just the Mandukya Upanishad. The Mandukya Upanishad Kataka has commentaries from the great Advaita Vedanta masters Gaudapada and Shankara. Now, Gaudapada is Shankara's guru's guru, and both are two of the most influential figures in non-dual philosophy, particularly Advaita Vedanta. And this quote is an amazing quote which gets into an understanding of what we would term the fourth state of consciousness, known in Sanskrit as Turiya. Now, before we get into the quote, we need to understand that there are four states of consciousness. So there is the waking state of consciousness, there is the dreaming state of consciousness, and then there is the deep dreamless state of consciousness. And then we have the fourth. Now, Turiya in Sanskrit, technically, we can just translate it as the fourth, or the fourth state of consciousness. Now, most of us know the first three states of consciousness, right? The waking, because we are experiencing this right now, the dreaming state of consciousness, and also the deep dreamless state of consciousness. Now, some will say, but I don't really experience much in that deep dreamless state of consciousness, but you can report after that state of consciousness that you had an experience of nothingness upon awakening. Now, the difference between those three states of consciousness and Turiya itself is Turiya is non-experiential. The other three are in the field of experience. And so that may be hard for a lot of us to understand, but that's what Turiya is. It is that ultimate state of consciousness that is, in some sense, non-experiential because it doesn't have a form of subject within that state of consciousness. It's the state of consciousness that arises when we go through the complete dissolution of our identity. Now, to explore this further, we have to look at the words within the Mandukya Upanishad Kataka. Turiya is not that which is conscious of the internal subjective world, nor that which is conscious of the external objective world, nor that which is conscious of both, nor that which is a mass all sentiency, nor that which is simple consciousness, nor that which is insentience. It is unseen by any sense organ, not related to anything, incomprehensible by the mind, uninferable, unthinkable, indescribable, essentially of the nature of consciousness constituting the self alone, negation of all phenomena, the peaceful, all bliss and the non-dual. This is what is known as the fourth Turiya. This is the Atman, and it has to be realized. That last line there is a plea to those on the spiritual path. It has to be realized. The Atman has to be realized for the perfection of consciousness to come about. And a lot of us become fearful of that because that means, in some sense, the end of our identity. Not in the way that you think, but your belief in the identity. You will continue to move through life as a person, but you won't believe in the story of this person. And so this is a wonderful quote in the Mandukya Upanishad Kataka, and it really nails the nature of Turiya itself. In the Mandukya Upanishad, it actually says that Turiya is not this, not that. It's not anything we can think of. It doesn't relate to any sort of phenomena. It's not a part of our inner subjective experience, nor is it part of the external objective experience. And that can be very hard for a lot of us to understand because it is outside of the field of experience itself. It is outside of the field of phenomena itself. It is not differentiated. It is not a form. It is completely formless. And even saying formless is not technically right because that's still a distinction that I am giving Turiya. But because we are at the perils of language itself, I can only use such words for you to understand the deeper meaning of Turiya. Also, the Mandukya Upanishad states that the Turiya is incomprehensible to the mind. It is indescribable. It is something that we cannot conceive of. It's not an object of knowledge. It's not something we can theorize. It's not something that we can understand intellectually. But we use language to give pointers to this and to try and have an understanding or at least a framework of understanding this, but to make it an object of knowledge, which is what the Mandukya Upanishad is stating, is an incorrect perspective. We cannot make it an object of knowledge, even though that we can speak about it, and we should speak about it. And so it states that the Turiya is essentially the nature of consciousness itself as the Atman, as the self alone. Because according to Advaita Vedanta, the self alone exists. The Atman alone exists. Everything else is an illusion that we fall prey to. Now, that illusion is the differentiation of our identification, of our ego, of our persona system. And so coming back into Turiya means that you've gone through a dissolution process of that identity and you abide as the self alone, because that's all that exists. And now remember, when I'm saying self here, I'm using it in the context of Vedanta, not as a person or an ego, but as the undifferentiated state of consciousness that we know as Atman in Sanskrit. And so from that place, everything is all peaceful, blissful, and non-dual. You see, so when you are no longer this or that, when you are no longer associated with this label or that label, and this is how I am, and I like this and I like that, you come back into harmony with the way things naturally are. And the way things naturally are peaceful, and this gives rise to Ananda in Sanskrit, which is actually unassociated bliss. And you see, so the bliss arises when you're not associated with an object of knowledge or this and that and so forth and so on. You're not identified with anything that is part of separation. And so when you begin to dissolve those layers of identity, you come into resonance with Ananda, with this unassociated bliss. And that's when you begin to understand the oneness of reality from that place, because you're not operating from a differentiated state of consciousness anymore. You are operating from the undifferentiated state. You abide in the non-experiential state of the Turiya, and you witness the other three states of consciousness that are bound to the experiential field, but you witness them from the Atman. And this is why it's very important, as the quote says, to realize this. They make an emphasis within this verse to realize the Atman. We must realize the Atman. We must come back into harmony with the Turiya. And now, to say come back into harmony with the Turiya, again, is incorrect, because we are always one with the Turiya, but we dwell in the other three states of consciousness. Now, in Vedanta, they use the rope and snake analogy, right? Where we take a rope to be a snake, because we see a snake in the rope, but the rope has always been the rope. Now, that's how we experience life. We project onto the world our own likes and dislikes, our conditioning basically, onto a world that is just the rope, and then we see the snake. And that's, again, the layers of the three states of consciousness superimposed onto the Turiya, onto the rope. Remember, it's just the rope, but because we dwell in those three states of consciousness and we are in the experiential field, we feel that we are a differentiated state of consciousness. And so then we look out into the world and we see this and that according to our likes and dislikes. And then we come into conflict with the world. And that's basically seeing the snake in the rope. When there is no snake, it's only the rope. It's only the Turiya. And that's what we need to understand from this quote, that all is only the Turiya. But when we believe in so much of the other three states of consciousness, not that we can escape them per se, but when we only identify ourselves within those three experiential states, we forget the fundamental foundation of life, which is only found and only discovered when we abide in the fourth state of consciousness, Turiya. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.